Most people in Hilltop, North Dakota thought Jake Hughes was just another small-town electrician who fixed broken outlets and rewired old houses. But they had no idea this quiet widower possessed the engineering knowledge to revolutionize electrical infrastructure. When Jake claimed he could design a flood-proof electrical grid to save their chronically flooded town, the mayor and city council laughed him out of the room, and Frank Barone, the established electrical contractor, publicly bet him he couldn't make it work. When the worst flood in Hilltop's history struck without warning, every conventional electrical system failed catastrophically, plunging the hospital, emergency services, and evacuation routes into dangerous darkness. But Jake's revolutionary grid system, the one they had all ridiculed, became the only thing standing between the town and complete disaster. This is the story of how a dismissed small-town electrician risked everything to prove that innovation and determination could triumph over skepticism and greed, saving not just his community, but revolutionizing emergency infrastructure across the country with a system that all started with a simple bet and a man who knew more than anyone gave him credit for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sycamore Lane as Jake Hughes pulled his weathered pickup truck to a stop outside the municipal center. The 42-year-old electrician sat for a moment, calloused hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the imposing brick building that housed Hilltop's city government. His dark hair showed streaks of premature gray, and his flannel shirt bore the permanent creases of a man who worked with his hands for a living. The truck's radio crackled with the morning weather report, mentioning possible storms later in the week. Jake climbed out of the truck, his work boots crunching on the gravel parking lot. He carried a thick manila folder under his arm, its contents representing months of careful calculations and detailed planning. The folder looked worn from handling, its edges soft with repeated opening and closing. As he walked toward the building's entrance, he passed other citizens heading to work, most of whom nodded politely, but without much recognition. To them, Jake Hughes was simply the local electrician who showed up when their power went out. Inside the municipal center, the weekly city council meeting was already underway. The council chamber occupied most of the building's main floor, with rows of folding chairs facing a raised platform where 5 council members sat behind a long table. Mayor Robert Dean, a heavy-set man in his mid-50s with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, presided from the center seat. His navy suit looked expensive compared to the casual attire of most attendees. Next on the agenda, Mayor Dean announced, consulting his papers, we have citizen concerns and proposals. Jake made his way to the front of the room, his footsteps echoing on the polished linoleum floor. Several dozen residents occupied the folding chairs, including familiar faces from around town. Frank Barone sat in the third row, his arms crossed over his broad chest. The established electrical contractor wore a pressed shirt with his company logo embroidered on the pocket. His dark eyes tracked Jake's movement with obvious skepticism. Mayor Dean, council members, Jake began, standing beside the podium but not stepping behind it. His voice carried the steady cadence of someone accustomed to explaining technical problems to worried customers. I'm here to propose a comprehensive upgrade to our electrical infrastructure that would eliminate the chronic power failures we experience during flooding. Councilmember Patricia Taylor, a sharp-featured woman in her late 40s, leaned forward in her chair. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a burgundy blazer that suggested she took her role seriously. Mr. Hughes, she said, we appreciate your concern, but infrastructure upgrades require significant capital investment. Our budget committee has already reviewed several proposals from established firms. Jake opened his manila folder and withdrew a set of blueprints, The papers rustled as he unfolded them, revealing detailed electrical schematics covered with handwritten notes and calculations. The drawings showed elevation diagrams, circuit layouts, and equipment specifications that would have impressed any electrical engineer. "I've designed a flood-resistant grid system that would cost 60% less than conventional upgrades," Jake explained, holding up the blueprints. "The key is elevating critical components above historical flood levels and using waterproof housing for ground-level equipment." Mayor Dean squinted at the papers from his position at the council table. His expression suggested polite interest mixed with doubt. Behind him, a large window overlooked the Basin District, where several streets showed water stains on building foundations from repeated flooding over the years. "These are impressive drawings, Mr. Hughes," the mayor said, "but electrical infrastructure design requires licensed engineers and certified contractors. We can't risk public safety on amateur proposals." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Several residents nodded, while others whispered among themselves. Jake's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady as he responded. "My calculations account for load distribution, emergency redundancy, and national electrical code requirements," he said. "I can provide technical specifications that meet or exceed industry standards." Frank Barone stood up from his seat, his voice carrying easily across the chamber. The contractor's presence commanded attention, his reputation built on decades of successful projects throughout the region. His company trucks were familiar sights around Hilltop, and several council members had hired his services for personal work. "With all due respect, Jake," Frank said, his tone patronizing, "rewiring houses and installing ceiling fans doesn't qualify someone to redesign municipal infrastructure. The city needs professionals, not hobbyists." Several audience members chuckled, and Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. He had expected skepticism, but the dismissive tone stung more than he had anticipated. His fingers tightened on the blueprints as he struggled to maintain his composure. "I understand your concerns," Jake replied, "but this system would prevent the kind of failures we saw during last spring's flooding. The hospital lost power for 6 hours, and the emergency services building went dark completely." Dr. Amanda Ibell, who had been sitting quietly in the back row, spoke up from her seat. The emergency room physician at Hilltop Regional Hospital was well respected in the community, and her presence at the meeting carried weight. Her scrubs suggested she had come directly from work. "Jake's right about the hospital," she said. "We had patients on life support running on backup generators. If those had failed, we could have lost lives." Mayor Dean nodded gravely, acknowledging the seriousness of the situation. The hospital's power problems during floods were well documented, and everyone present understood the potential consequences. However, his expression remained doubtful as he looked back at Jake's blueprints. "Dr. Bell raises valid concerns," the mayor said, "but addressing them requires proven solutions from established contractors. Mr. Barone's company has handled municipal projects across 3 counties. Frank stepped into the aisle, his confidence evident in his posture and tone. He gestured dismissively toward Jake's blueprints, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to winning contracts and managing large projects. "I've been in this business for 25 years, Frank declared. "Flood-proofing electrical systems isn't as simple as moving some equipment higher up. There are complex integration issues, regulatory compliance requirements, and warranty considerations that require professional expertise." Jake felt the room's sentiment shifting against him. The logical arguments he had prepared seemed to carry less weight than Frank's established reputation and professional credentials. Still, he pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that his design could genuinely solve the town's chronic problems. "I'm willing to demonstrate the system's effectiveness," Jake said, his voice growing stronger. "Build a test section in the Basin District and monitor its performance during the next flood event." Patricia Taylor exchanged glances with other council members before responding. Her tone suggested patience wearing thin, and her body language indicated she considered the discussion concluded. Mr. Hughes, we appreciate your civic spirit, but the city can't experiment with essential infrastructure. We have liability concerns and insurance requirements that demand proven contractors and certified systems. The other council members nodded in agreement, and Jake realized his formal presentation was failing. The technical merits of his design seemed irrelevant compared to bureaucratic considerations and professional politics. He folded his blueprint slowly, his mind racing for a different approach. "What would it take to convince you?" Jake asked. "What proof would satisfy your concerns about the system's viability?" Frank Barone laughed, the sound carrying a mixture of amusement and derision that drew more chuckles from the audience. His confidence had grown throughout the exchange, and he sensed an opportunity to definitively end the discussion while reinforcing his own position. "You want proof?" Frank said, spreading his arms wide. "Fine. If you're so confident in your amateur hour designs, put your money where your mouth is. Build your flood-proof system and guarantee it works better than professional installations." Mayor Dean held up his hand, sensing the conversation moving toward confrontation. His role required maintaining decorum during public meetings, and he could see emotions escalating on both sides of the debate. "Gentlemen, let's keep this professional," the mayor said. "Mr. Hughes has presented his proposal and will take it under advisement with other infrastructure recommendations." But Jake's frustration had reached a breaking point. Months of work on his design, years of watching preventable power failures, endanger his neighbors, and now public dismissal of his expertise combined to override his usual caution. "I accept your challenge, Frank," Jake said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet chamber. "I'll build a working demonstration of flood-resistant electrical infrastructure, and when the next flood comes, we'll see whose system keeps the lights on." The room fell silent. Council members exchanged uncertain glances, while audience members leaned forward in their seats. Frank's confident expression faltered slightly as he realized the discussion had moved beyond rhetoric into actual commitment. "You're talking about significant time and expense," Frank said, his tone more cautious now. "Are you prepared to back up that confidence with real consequences?" Jake looked around the room, seeing faces that reflected doubt, curiosity, and skepticism in equal measure. His son, Tommy, would think he was crazy for taking such a public risk. His sister-in-law, Angela, would worry about him jeopardizing his business reputation, but something deeper than pride drove his response. "If my system fails during the next major flood, I'll close my business and leave town," Jake said. "But if it works better than conventional installations, the city considers my proposal for the full municipal upgrade." Mayor Dean's eyebrows rose at the dramatic stakes Jake had just proposed. The chamber remained silent as everyone processed the implications of the challenge. Frank looked surprised by Jake's willingness to risk everything on his untested design. "That's quite a gamble, Mr. Hughes," the mayor said slowly. "Are you certain you want to make such a public commitment?" Jake's heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now, back to the story. The walk from the municipal center to Hughes Electric felt longer than usual. Jake's work boots struck the sidewalk with deliberate steps. As he carried his folder of blueprints past the familiar storefronts of Sycamore Lane, the late morning sun had warmed the North Dakota air, but he barely noticed. His mind replayed the confrontation with Frank Barone and the council, analyzing every word and gesture that had led to his dramatic public commitment. Hilltop's main business district stretched for 6 blocks, a collection of brick buildings, constructed in the 1950s when the town's population had peaked at nearly 8,000 residents. Now fewer than 5,000 people called Hilltop home, and several storefronts stood empty despite the reasonable rents. Jake passed Bell Hardware, where Jim Bell was arranging a display of snow shovels in the front window, preparing for the coming winter season. "Morning, Jake," Jim called through the open door. The hardware store owner had inherited the business from his father and maintained the same commitment to personal service that had sustained it for 4 decades. "Heard you caused quite a stir at the council meeting." Jake paused at the store entrance, not surprised that news had already begun, spreading through the small town's efficient gossip network. In Hilltop, major events traveled faster than the morning newspaper delivery, carried by residents who shared information over coffee at the Ramos family diner and during chance encounters on Sycamore Lane. "News travels fast," Jake replied, managing a tired smile. "Guess I bit off more than I can chew." Jim stepped outside, wiping his hands on a shop apron stained with grease and paint. The older man's weathered face showed concern, the expression of someone who had watched the community struggle through economic downturns and natural disasters for most of his adult life. "Maybe, maybe not," Jim said thoughtfully. "Frank Barone's been getting fat contracts around here for years, but that doesn't mean he's the only one who knows electricity. You fixed my store's wiring after that storm 3 years ago, and it's never given me a problem since." Jake appreciated the support, but he knew residential wiring repairs differed significantly from municipal infrastructure design. The technical challenges he had committed to solving involved coordination between multiple systems, regulatory compliance, and performance standards that exceeded anything he had previously attempted in Hilltop. "Thanks, Jim. I'll probably be needing some supplies in the coming weeks." The hardware store owner nodded, understanding the implication. "You know where to find me. And Jake, sometimes this town needs someone to shake things up a little." Hughes Electric occupied a converted garage 2 blocks from the town center, its metal siding painted dark blue with white lettering that had faded over the years. Jake had purchased the building 12 years ago, shortly after moving to Hilltop with his wife Lisa and infant son Tommy. The location provided easy access to residential customers while keeping overhead costs manageable. Inside, the shop reflected the practical needs of a working electrician. Steel shelving lined the walls, holding organized bins of wire, conduit, switches, and outlets. A workbench occupied one corner, cluttered with testing equipment, hand tools, and partially disassembled electrical components. The office area consisted of a metal desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a computer that Jake used primarily for ordering supplies and maintaining customer records. Jake spread his blueprints across the workbench, weighing down the corners with electrical meters and wire strippers. The detailed drawings represented hundreds of hours of work, performed during evenings and weekends over the past 8 months. Every circuit diagram had been calculated multiple times, every component specification verified against manufacturer. Data sheets. The foundation of his flood-proof design rested on 3 core principles: elevation, isolation, and redundancy. Critical switching equipment would be mounted at least 8 feet above historical flood levels, enclosed in weatherproof housings rated for outdoor industrial use. Ground-level components would feature sealed construction with pressure relief. Valves to prevent water intrusion. Multiple circuit paths would ensure continued operation even if individual components failed. A knock on the shop door interrupted his study of the blueprints. Through the glass, Jake saw Sarah Vargas, Hilltop's town engineer, holding a steaming coffee cup and looking somewhat hesitant about disturbing him. Sarah was 38 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair and intelligent dark eyes that reflected her analytical nature. She wore jeans and a polo shirt, with the town's logo embroidered on the chest. "Come in," Jake called, rolling up the nearest blueprint to make space on the cluttered workbench. Sarah entered the shop, glancing around at the organized chaos of electrical supplies and tools. Her engineering background allowed her to appreciate the systematic arrangement of materials and the quality of Jake's testing equipment, which exceeded what most residential electricians considered necessary. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened at the council meeting," she said, setting her coffee cup on a clear section of the workbench. "Your proposal caught everyone off guard, including me." Jake studied her expression, trying to determine whether she had come to offer support or express concern about his challenge to Frank Barone. Sarah's position as town engineer placed her in an awkward situation, caught between official responsibilities and personal opinions about infrastructure needs. "I probably should have discussed it with you first," Jake admitted. "Municipal electrical systems fall under your department's oversight." Sarah nodded, appreciating his acknowledgement of proper protocol. Her engineering degree from North Dakota State University had prepared her for technical challenges, but small-town politics often proved more complex than structural calculations or drainage system designs. "The council likes to work through established channels," she said diplomatically. "Frank Barone has history with them, successful projects, professional references. You're asking them to trust someone they see as an outsider." Jake felt a flash of irritation at being labeled an outsider after 12 years of living and working in Hilltop. He had rewired houses, installed commercial lighting systems, and performed emergency repairs during storms and blackouts. His work had kept businesses operating and families safe, but apparently that counted for less than Frank's political connections. "I've been fixing electrical problems in this town since before some of those council members were elected," Jake said, his voice sharper than intended. Sarah held up her hand, indicating she understood his frustration. Her role required balancing multiple perspectives while maintaining professional relationships with contractors, officials, and residents who often held conflicting views about municipal priorities. "I'm not questioning your skills or commitment," she said, "but designing flood-resistant infrastructure involves more than electrical knowledge. There are environmental factors, integration requirements, and long-term maintenance considerations." Jake unrolled one of his blueprints, pointing to a detailed cross-section that showed equipment mounting specifications and drainage provisions. The drawing included elevation measurements, foundation details, and access requirements that demonstrated his consideration of practical implementation challenges. "I've accounted for thermal expansion, moisture control, and service accessibility," he said. "The design incorporates lessons learned from flood-prone regions across the Midwest, adapted for Hilltop's specific topography and weather patterns." Sarah leaned closer to examine the blueprint, her engineering training evident in how she studied the technical details. Her expression shifted from polite interest to genuine surprise as she recognized the sophistication of Jake's calculations and specifications. "These drawings show advanced knowledge of power distribution theory," she said slowly. "Where did you learn grid design principles?" Jake hesitated, realizing his response would reveal information he had kept private since moving to Hilltop. His decision to work as a local electrician rather than pursue engineering opportunities had been deliberate, motivated by personal circumstances rather than professional limitations. "I have a master's degree in electrical engineering from Minnesota," he said quietly, "specialized in power systems and grid integration." Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. She set down her coffee cup and gave Jake her complete attention, reassessing everything she thought she knew about the quiet electrician who had just challenged the town's established contractor. "You're a licensed professional engineer?" Jake shook his head. "I never took the PE exam. Came here to raise my son after my wife died, and small-town life didn't require professional credentials. Local electrical work paid the bills and let me be available for Tommy. The revelation explained much about Jake's confidence in proposing municipal infrastructure improvements and his detailed technical drawings. Sarah realized she had been thinking of him as an ambitious tradesman when he actually possessed formal training comparable to her own engineering background. "Why didn't you mention your education at the council meeting?" she asked. Jake rolled up the blueprint, his movements deliberate and controlled. The question touched on complicated emotions about his decision to abandon a promising engineering career for the sake of his family and his struggle to rebuild his life after Lisa's death from cancer. "Because it shouldn't matter," he said. "The design either works or it doesn't. Academic credentials don't change the technical merits of the proposal." Sarah understood his perspective, but recognized the political realities of municipal decision-making. Elected officials responded to perceived expertise and professional legitimacy as much as technical competence, especially when approving projects that involved public safety and significant financial investment. "Credentials matter to the council," she said. "They need confidence that proposed solutions come from qualified sources, and your engineering background would carry weight with Mayor Dean and the other members." Jake considered her advice while organizing his blueprints into a neat stack. The idea of leveraging his educational background felt like a compromise of the principles that had guided his life in Hilltop, where he preferred being judged by his work rather than his degrees. "Frank Barone made this personal when he called me an amateur," Jake said. "Now it's about proving that innovation and careful analysis can compete with establishment politics and inflated reputations." Sarah recognized the determination in his voice and the challenge he faced in pursuing his flood-proof grid demonstration. Her position as town engineer would eventually require her to evaluate his system's performance and make recommendations to the council about its viability for broader implementation. "If you're serious about this demonstration, you'll need permits for electrical installations and inspections to verify code compliance," she said. "I can help navigate the approval process, but the system has to meet all regulatory requirements." Jake appreciated her offer of assistance, understanding that Sarah's support would be crucial for moving forward with his project. Her engineering credentials and official position could provide legitimacy that his technical skills alone might not achieve with skeptical officials. "I'll need to identify a suitable location for the demonstration," he said, "somewhere in the Basin District where flooding is predictable and the results will be obvious." Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through recent photos of flood-affected areas. The Basin District's lower elevation made it particularly vulnerable during spring snowmelt and summer storms, when the Knife River overflowed its banks and inundated streets for several blocks. "The old substation on River Street floods every year," she suggested. "It's been abandoned since the power company installed the new facility on higher ground. You could use it as a test site without interfering with active infrastructure." Jake nodded, already visualizing how his flood-proof design could be adapted to the abandoned facility. The location would provide an ideal demonstration site, allowing direct comparison between his elevated, waterproof installation and the conventional equipment that had repeatedly failed during previous floods. "I'll need to survey the site and develop specific installation plans," he said. "The demonstration has to be convincing enough to change minds, which means every detail has to be perfect." Sarah finished her coffee and prepared to leave, but paused at the shop door. Her expression reflected both professional interest and personal concern about the challenge Jake had accepted and the potential consequences of failure. "Jake, you realize what you're risking. If this doesn't work, Frank Barone will make sure. Everyone knows about it. Your reputation, your business, everything you've built here could be gone." Jake looked around his shop, taking in the organized tools, the steady stream of customer service calls, and the modest but reliable income that had supported his family for over a decade. He understood exactly what he was risking, But he also knew the potential impact of his flood-proof system on the community's safety and resilience. "Sometimes you have to risk what you have to protect what matters most," he said. "This town needs better infrastructure, and if I don't try to provide it, who will?" The abandoned substation on River Street stood like a monument to Hilltop's infrastructure problems. Jake parked his truck beside the chain-link fence that surrounded the facility, noting how rust stains on the concrete pad marked previous flood levels. The old equipment had been removed 3 years ago, leaving only mounting brackets and conduit stubs that told the story of repeated water damage and emergency repairs. Tommy Hughes climbed out of the passenger seat, his 16-year-old frame already approaching his father's height. The teenager wore jeans and a Hilltop High School football jersey, his dark hair tousled from the morning practice session. He surveyed the abandoned facility with the skeptical expression that seemed to be his default response to most adult decisions. "This is where you're going to prove you're smarter than everyone else?" Tommy asked, his tone carrying the casual sarcasm that Jake had learned to interpret as genuine interest disguised as teenage indifference. Jake unlocked the gate and stepped onto the concrete pad, measuring distances with his eyes and visualizing how his elevated equipment platform would look once installed. The site offered several advantages: proximity to existing power lines, good drainage for floodwater, and visibility from River Street that would make the demonstration obvious to anyone driving past. "I'm going to prove that good engineering can solve problems better than expensive contracts," Jake corrected, pulling a measuring tape from his tool belt. "Help me get dimensions for the equipment platform." Tommy took one end of the tape measure and walked to the far corner of the concrete pad. Despite his apparent disinterest, he had inherited his father's methodical approach to technical work and understood the importance of precise measurements for any construction project. 32 feet by 24 feet, Tommy called out, holding the tape steady while Jake recorded the dimension in a small notebook. Jake made notes about existing utility connections and access requirements for his demonstration system. The old substation's layout would allow him to install modern, flood-resistant equipment while maintaining comparison points with conventional installation methods that had repeatedly failed at this location. A car door slammed in the street, and Jake looked up to see Frank Baroni approaching the fence with 2 men in expensive suits. The electrical contractor's confident stride and animated gesturing suggested he was conducting some kind of tour or consultation related to municipal projects. Well, Frank called through the fence. "Already planning your failure, Jake?" The 2 suited men flanked Frank as he approached the gate. Jake recognized one as council member Bill Hammond, Patricia Taylor's political ally, who consistently voted with the mayor on infrastructure issues. The other man was unfamiliar, but his tailored clothing and leather briefcase suggested professional importance. "Just surveying the demonstration site," Jake replied evenly, continuing his measurements despite the unwelcome attention. Frank gestured toward the abandoned equipment pad with theatrical dismay, addressing his companions as if Jake couldn't hear every word. His voice carried the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to winning contracts through personal relationships rather than competitive bidding. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Frank said. "Amateur hour installations that create more problems than they solve. The city deserves professional expertise, not basement workshop experiments." Councilmember Hammond nodded gravely, his expression suggesting serious concern about municipal decision-making processes. His silver hair and conservative suit projected an image of establishment respectability that contrasted sharply with Jake's work clothes and practical equipment. The liability issues alone should concern any responsible official, Hammond agreed. Municipal infrastructure requires proven solutions from established contractors. The third man stepped forward, extending his hand toward Frank with the gesture, of someone accustomed to deference and immediate attention. His confident bearing and expensive accessories suggested wealth and political influence that exceeded local small-town standards. "Mr. Barone, I'm impressed by your grasp of the situation," the stranger said. "Regional Electrical Systems is always looking for reliable local partners who understand both technical requirements and political realities." Jake's attention sharpened at the mention of Regional Electrical Systems, a large contractor based in Minneapolis that specialized in municipal projects across the upper Midwest. The company's involvement suggested stakes higher than simple local politics, potentially involving contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Tommy moved closer to his father, sensing tension in the adult conversation despite not fully understanding the implications. The teenager had grown up watching his father work with quiet competence, and the dismissive tone from the men at the fence bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "Dad, who are those guys?" Tommy asked quietly. "Frank's bringing in outside." "Good pressure," Jake replied, keeping his voice low while continuing to take measurements. "Trying to make sure the council sees me as a threat to established business relationships." Frank's voice grew louder, clearly intended for Jake's benefit as much as his companion's information. The contractor had positioned himself at the gate, where his words would carry clearly across the abandoned facility. "The problem with letting amateurs experiment with public infrastructure is that failure affects everyone," Frank declared. "When that flood-proof system doesn't work, who's going to explain to families why their power stayed off for days?" Jake felt his jaw tighten, but forced himself to continue working methodically. He had expected opposition from Frank, but the involvement of Regional Electrical Systems suggested a coordinated effort to undermine his demonstration before it could even begin. The regional electrical representative pulled out his phone and began taking pictures of the abandoned substation, documenting the site with the thoroughness of someone planning future development. His attention to detail suggested familiarity with infrastructure assessment and project planning. "This location confirms everything we discussed about upgrading Hilltop's electrical capacity," the man told Frank. "Our engineers could design a comprehensive system that meets modern standards while providing long-term reliability." Councilmember Hammond seemed pleased by the prospect of professional involvement from a recognized regional contractor. His political instincts favored safe, conventional solutions that would reflect well on his judgment if successful and provide cover if problems developed. Regional Electrical has an excellent reputation with county governments throughout North Dakota, Hammond observed. Their expertise would certainly give the council confidence in any infrastructure investment. Jake realized he was witnessing the formation of a political alliance designed to ensure his demonstration failed to influence municipal decisions regardless of its technical success. Frank's connections with council members, combined with Regional Electrical's resources and reputation, created formidable opposition to any innovative alternatives. "Tommy, let's finish these measurements and get out of here," Jake said, rolling up his tape measure with deliberate casualness. The teenager helped gather tools and equipment, understanding his father's desire to avoid direct confrontation with the men at the fence. Tommy had inherited enough of his father's analytical nature to recognize when tactical retreat made more sense than immediate engagement. As they walked toward Jake's truck, Frank called out one final comment, calculated to plant doubt about the upcoming demonstration project. "Jake, you still have time to withdraw that ridiculous challenge before you embarrass yourself publicly. No one expects a local handyman to compete with professional electrical engineers." Jake paused at his truck door, considering whether to respond to Frank's provocation. Tommy watched his father's face, seeing the controlled anger that he recognized from difficult customer situations and bureaucratic frustrations. "Frank, when my system keeps the lights on during the next flood, I'll make sure everyone knows the difference between real engineering and expensive talk," Jake said, his voice carrying across the site with quiet conviction. The drive back to Hughes Electric passed in contemplative silence. Tommy stared out the passenger window at the familiar streets of Hilltop, processing what he had observed at the abandoned substation and thinking about his father's growing conflict with established business interests. "Are you really going to be able to build something better than that big company?" Tommy finally asked. Jake considered his son's question carefully, understanding that his answer would influence how Tommy viewed both the upcoming demonstration and his father's capabilities. The teenager deserved honesty about the challenges ahead, rather than false reassurance. "I'm going to build something that works better for this specific situation," Jake said. "Regional electrical design systems for dozens of different communities. But I'm focusing on exactly what Hilltop needs to solve its particular flooding problems." Tommy nodded, satisfied with his father's measured confidence. The teenager had grown up watching Jake approach problems methodically and deliver solutions that worked reliably, even when other approaches had failed. Back at the electrical shop, Jake found Dr. Eleanor Hunt waiting beside his truck. The 67-year-old retired meteorologist held a manila folder and wore the patient expression of someone accustomed to lengthy waits. Her grey hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her khaki pants and hiking boots suggested someone who spent considerable time outdoors. "Mr. Hughes, I hope you don't mind my stopping by unannounced," Dr. Hunt said. "I heard about your proposal at the council meeting and wanted to discuss the weather patterns you'll need to consider. For your demonstration." Jake unlocked the shop door, intrigued by Dr. Hunt's offer of assistance. The retired meteorologist had moved to Hilltop 5 years ago after a distinguished career with the National Weather Service, and her expertise in regional climate patterns could provide valuable insights for his project. "Any help would be appreciated," Jake said, gesturing for her to enter the shop. "I've been studying historical flood data, but professional weather analysis would strengthen my design calculations." Dr. Hunt opened her folder on Jake's workbench, revealing detailed charts and graphs that tracked precipitation patterns, river levels, and flooding frequency over the past 30 years. Her data showed clear trends in seasonal variation and storm intensity that could inform infrastructure planning. "Hilltop experiences significant flooding approximately every 18 months, she explained, pointing to a graph that showed river level fluctuations. "Spring snowmelt creates the most predictable events, but summer storms can generate flash floods that exceed historical records." Jake studied her charts, noting correlations between weather patterns and the power outages he had experienced since moving to Hilltop. Dr. Hunt's data confirmed his observation that conventional electrical installations failed consistently during flood events, regardless of their age or maintenance status. "My floodproof design accounts for water levels up to 12 feet above normal river stage," Jake said, showing her his elevation specifications. "Historical data suggests that should cover all recorded flood events, plus a safety margin." Dr. Hunt examined his calculations with the analytical eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating weather-related infrastructure risks. Her expression showed growing respect for the thoroughness of Jake's preparation and the sophistication of his technical approach. "Your safety margins are conservative but appropriate," she said. "However, climate trends suggest increasing storm intensity over the coming decades. Have you considered adaptive features that could accommodate changing conditions?" Jake appreciated her forward-thinking perspective and realized that Dr. Hunt could provide valuable credibility for his demonstration project. Her scientific reputation and professional background would carry weight with council members who might dismiss his engineering credentials. "Would you be willing to provide technical consultation for the demonstration?" Jake asked. Your meteorological analysis could help document the testing conditions and validate the results. Dr. Hunt smiled, clearly pleased by the opportunity to contribute her expertise to a practical problem-solving effort. Her retirement had left her with considerable time and energy that she was eager to direct toward community improvement projects. "I'd be delighted to help," she said. "It's been too long since I worked on a project where good science could make a real difference in people's lives." Tommy had been listening quietly from his position near the office area, impressed, despite himself, by the professional level of his father's preparation and the quality of support he was attracting. The teenager was beginning to understand that his father's challenge to Frank Barone involved more than local pride or business competition. "Dr. Hunter, do you really think my dad can build something that works better than what the big companies install?" Tommy asked. The retired meteorologist looked thoughtfully at the young man, recognizing his need for reassurance about his father's ambitious undertaking. Her answer would influence not only Tommy's confidence, but also his understanding of how innovation and expertise could challenge established systems. "Your father is approaching this problem with the same scientific rigor I used in weather forecasting," Dr. Hunt said. "Good engineering combined with careful analysis usually produces better results than expensive solutions that ignore local conditions." Jake felt gratitude for Dr. Hunt's support and her ability to explain technical concepts in terms that Tommy could understand and appreciate. Her involvement would strengthen his demonstration project while providing educational value that extended beyond simple infrastructure improvement. The Ramos family diner buzzed with the familiar sounds of breakfast service as Jake entered through the glass door, its bell announcing his arrival to the morning regulars scattered across red vinyl booths. Maria Ramos looked up from behind the counter where she was refilling coffee for Pete Callahan, the retired power plant worker who had become a fixture at the corner booth since his wife passed 2 years ago. "Coffee and the usual?" Maria asked, already reaching for the pot and a clean mug. Jake nodded, settling onto a stool at the counter where he could observe the diner's morning crowd without drawing unnecessary attention. The past week had brought increasing scrutiny from curious residents who wanted to discuss his challenge to Frank Barone, and he preferred quieter moments when possible. Pete Callahan waved him over to the corner booth, his weathered face showing the satisfied expression of someone with interesting information to share. The 71-year-old had worked at the regional power plant for 43 years before retirement, accumulating encyclopedic knowledge about electrical systems throughout the area. "Sit down, Jake," Pete said, gesturing to the opposite side of the booth. "Got something you need to hear about your demonstration project." Jake carried his coffee to Pete's table, noting the serious tone that suggested more than casual conversation. The older man's connections throughout the electrical industry often provided insights into regional politics and business developments that affected local communities. "What's on your mind, Pete?" Pete leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the diner's ambient noise, providing natural privacy for their conversation. His expression combined concern with the satisfaction of someone who enjoyed being the first to share important information. "Talked to my nephew Eddie yesterday," Pete said. "He's doing plumbing work at the municipal center," heard Frank Barone, "meeting with Mayor Dean and that regional electrical fellow. They're planning to fast-track a comprehensive electrical upgrade proposal before your demonstration can influence the council's decision." Jake felt his stomach tighten at the implications. If Frank could secure a municipal contract before the next flood season, the demonstration would become irrelevant regardless of its technical success. The timeline for proving his system's effectiveness depended on natural weather events that couldn't be scheduled or accelerated. "How fast are they moving?" Jake asked. Pete stirred sugar into his coffee, considering the question with the deliberation of someone who understood bureaucratic processes from decades of experience with regulatory agencies and municipal authorities. Eddie heard them talking about a special council session next month, Pete said. Frank's promising regional electrical can start work immediately after contract approval, finish the whole upgrade before spring flood season. Jake realized the political strategy behind Frank's accelerated timeline. By completing conventional infrastructure improvements before his flood-proof system could be tested, Frank would eliminate any opportunity for performance comparison while claiming credit for solving Hilltop's electrical problems. Maria approached their table with a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, setting it in front of Jake with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been serving breakfast for over a decade. Her dark eyes reflected curiosity about their intense conversation. "You boys planning to solve all the town's problems over coffee?" she asked with a smile that suggested genuine interest rather than casual teasing. Pete chuckled, but his expression remained serious as he considered Maria's question. The diner owner's family had lived in Hilltop for 3 generations, and their restaurant served as an informal community center where local issues were discussed and opinions formed. Jake's trying to keep Frank Barone from overcharging the city for electrical work, Pete explained, but Frank's got political connections that might make the whole demonstration meaningless. Maria's smile faded as she considered the implications for her business and the broader community. Like most small business owners, she understood how municipal spending decisions affected local economic conditions and the financial burden carried by taxpayers. "My electricity bills have doubled in the past 5 years," she said. "Every time we have flooding, the power company raises rates to cover infrastructure repairs. Something's got to change." Jake appreciated her support, but recognized the challenge of translating individual concerns into collective political action. The council responded to organized pressure and professional presentations rather than scattered complaints from affected businesses and residents. "The demonstration will show there's a better way to handle flooding problems," Jake said, "but only if I can build it before Frank locks up the municipal contract." Pete finished his coffee and leaned back in the booth, his expression thoughtful. As he considered Jake's situation, the retired power plant worker had observed decades of infrastructure decisions and understood the complex relationship between technical merit and political expedience. "What do you need to make this work?" Pete asked directly. Jake had been asking himself the same question since learning about Frank's accelerated timeline. The demonstration required significant equipment purchases, construction labor, and regulatory approvals that normally took months to coordinate properly. "Money, materials, and manpower," Jake said, "plus enough time to install everything before the next flood season." Pete nodded, understanding the scope of Jake's challenge. The older man's network of retired workers and local tradesmen represented a potential resource that could provide both labor and expertise for the demonstration project. "I know guys who'd work for cost if they believed in what you're doing," Pete offered. "Retired electricians, plumbers, construction workers who've got time and skills but not much to do with them." Maria refilled their coffee cups, lingering near the table as she considered her own contribution to Jake's project. The diner's location on Sycamore Lane made it a natural gathering place for coordinating community activities and organizing volunteer efforts. "You could use this place for planning meetings," she suggested. "No charge for coffee and workspace if you're trying to help the town." Jake felt grateful for their offers of support, but he also understood the personal risks they were accepting by openly supporting his challenge to Frank Barone. Small business owners couldn't afford to alienate influential contractors who controlled significant local spending. "I don't want either of you getting crosswise with Frank over this," Jake said. "He's got a long memory and a lot of influence with people who make decisions about municipal contracts." Pete waved dismissively, his expression showing the confidence of someone who had faced larger challenges during his working years. The retired power plant worker had dealt with corporate politics and regulatory pressure throughout his career. Without compromising his principles, "Frank Barone doesn't scare me," Pete said firmly. "I've been watching him cut corners and inflate prices for years. About time someone called him on it." The diner's bell chimed as Deputy Sheriff Mike Mendoza entered, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. The emergency coordinator's presence reminded Jake of another crucial aspect of his demonstration: the system's performance during actual emergency conditions would determine its value to the community. Mike approached their table, his expression suggesting official business rather than casual breakfast conversation. The deputy's role in emergency management made him particularly interested in infrastructure reliability during crisis situations. "Jake, got a minute to talk about your flood-proof electrical system?" Mike asked. Pete started to slide out of the booth to give them privacy, but Mike gestured for him to remain seated. The deputy's inclusive approach suggested he valued Pete's expertise and wanted multiple perspectives on emergency preparedness issues. "I've been thinking about your demonstration," Mike continued, settling into the booth beside Pete. "Emergency services need guaranteed power during flood events. If your system can deliver that reliability, it changes everything about how we handle evacuations and rescue operations." Jake appreciated Mike's focus on practical applications rather than political considerations. Emergency coordinators dealt with life and death consequences of infrastructure failures, making them natural allies for innovative solutions that improved public safety. The design includes dedicated circuits for emergency services, Jake explained. Hospital, fire station, police communications, and evacuation route lighting would have priority power allocation and independent backup systems. Mike's interest increased as Jake described the emergency features built into his flood-proof design. The deputy had experienced the frustration of coordinating rescue operations in darkness when conventional electrical systems failed during previous flood events. How long could those systems operate independently? Mike asked. Jake had calculated emergency power requirements extensively, understanding that extended outages during flood conditions could create cascading failures that threatened lives and property throughout the affected area. "Minimum 72 hours with current battery technology," Jake said. "Longer if we integrate renewable charging sources like solar panels on elevated platforms." Mike nodded approvingly, recognizing the value of extended emergency power capability. His experience with natural disasters had taught him that infrastructure resilience often determined the difference between manageable incidents and community-wide catastrophes. "That would give us time to coordinate outside assistance and establish temporary facilities," Mike said. "Current backup systems barely last 12 hours before we're operating blind." Pete's expression showed growing enthusiasm as he listened to the conversation between Jake and Mike. The retired power plant worker understood both the technical feasibility and the practical importance of reliable emergency power systems. "Jake, this is bigger than just proving Frank wrong," Pete said. "You're talking about saving lives when the next big flood hits." Jake felt the weight of that responsibility as he considered the broader implications of his demonstration project. What had begun as a response to professional dismissal had evolved into a community safety initiative with stakes far beyond personal reputation or business competition. Maria returned to refill coffee cups, having overheard enough of their conversation. To understand the serious nature of Jake's project, her expression reflected the concern of someone who lived and worked in the flood-prone areas that would benefit most from improved electrical reliability. "How can regular people help with something this important?" she asked. Jake looked around. the table at faces showing genuine commitment to supporting his demonstration project. Pete's offer of skilled labor, Maria's provision of meeting space, and Mike's emergency services perspective represented the foundation of community support that could make the project successful. "Spread the word about what we're trying to accomplish," Jake said. "Help people understand that this isn't about me versus Frank Barone. It's about building infrastructure that protects families and businesses when natural disasters strike." Mike pulled out his phone and scrolled through recent weather reports, his expression showing the professional concern of someone responsible for emergency preparedness. The deputy's access to regional weather data provided insights into conditions that could affect Jake's demonstration timeline. "Speaking of natural disasters," Mike said, "Dr. Hunt's been tracking some unusual weather patterns. Early winter storm systems moving through the upper Midwest, potentially bringing heavy precipitation to our region." Jake's attention sharpened at the mention of early storm activity. His demonstration system needed testing under actual flood conditions to prove its effectiveness, but the timing of natural weather events remained beyond his control. "How early are we talking about?" Jake asked. Mike consulted his phone again, reading from emergency management bulletins that tracked regional weather developments affecting multiple jurisdictions throughout North Dakota and Minnesota. "Could see significant precipitation within the next 4 to 6 weeks, Mike said. "Dr. Hunt thinks we might get our first test case before Thanksgiving if current patterns continue." The accelerated timeline created both opportunity and pressure for Jake's demonstration project. Early flood conditions would provide testing opportunities before Frank could complete his municipal contract negotiations, but only if the system could be installed and operational within the shortened time frame. Pete leaned forward, his expression showing the determination of someone ready to commit fully to a worthwhile cause. The retired worker's offer of assistance suddenly carried greater urgency given the compressed schedule. "How fast can we get this thing built?" Pete asked. Jake considered the construction requirements, equipment delivery schedules, and regulatory approval processes that needed coordination within the next month. The challenge seemed overwhelming, but the alternative was allowing Frank's political maneuvering to eliminate any opportunity for innovation. "Fast enough," Jake said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had sustained him through previous challenges. "But we'll need to start immediately." The sound of concrete mixers and power tools echoed across the abandoned substation site on River Street as Jake's volunteer crew began construction of the elevated equipment platform. Pete Callahan directed a team of 4 retired tradesmen who had arrived before dawn, their weathered hands moving with the practiced efficiency of workers who had built half of Hilltop's infrastructure over the past 4 decades. Eddie Kowalski guided the concrete truck's chute, while his father Pete marked elevation points with a surveyor's level borrowed from Sarah Vargas. The 43-year-old plumber had taken vacation days from his regular job to help with the demonstration project, understanding that his participation carried professional risks if Frank Barone decided to retaliate against supporting contractors. "Foundations got to be perfect," Pete called over the noise of the concrete mixer. "No point building flood-proof equipment on a base that'll shift when the ground gets saturated." Jake monitored the concrete pour while checking specifications on his blueprint, ensuring that anchor bolt locations matched exactly with the equipment mounting requirements. The elevated platform would support several thousand pounds of electrical gear, and any construction errors would compromise the entire demonstration. Sarah Vargas arrived with a clipboard full of permit documentation and inspection schedules, her official presence providing municipal legitimacy for the construction activities. The town engineer's support had proven crucial for navigating regulatory requirements that could have delayed the project indefinitely. "Building inspector wants to see the foundation before we proceed with the platform structure," Sarah announced, consulting her schedule. He can be here at 2 o'clock if the concrete's had enough time to set up. Jake nodded, calculating the timeline for foundation curing and subsequent construction phases. The compressed schedule left no margin for delays or rework, requiring each step to proceed flawlessly on the first attempt. A car door slammed nearby, and Jake looked up to see Frank Barone emerging from his company truck with 2 men in business suits. The electrical contractor's presence at the construction site suggested either professional curiosity or deliberate intimidation, neither of which Jake could afford to address while managing critical construction activities. Frank approached the work area with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention and respect at construction sites. His expensive work boots and pristine tool belt projected an image of successful professionalism that contrasted with the utilitarian appearance of Jake's volunteer crew. "Quite an operation you've got here, Jake," Frank called out, his voice carrying clearly over the construction noise. "Hope you've got proper insurance coverage for all these volunteers." Eddie Kowalski looked up from the concrete work, his expression showing irritation at the interruption. The plumber understood construction site safety and recognized Frank's comment as an attempt to plant doubt about liability issues rather than genuine concern for worker welfare. "We've got commercial liability through my contractor's policy," Eddie replied firmly. "Everyone here knows what they're doing." Frank's companions surveyed the construction activities with the analytical attention of professionals evaluating competitor capabilities. Their expensive clothing and detailed note-taking suggested they represented regional electrical systems interests in documenting Jake's demonstration project. "Insurance won't help if this amateur installation causes problems downstream," Frank said, addressing his comments to the regional electrical representatives rather than Jake's crew. Municipal electrical work requires proven expertise and established quality control procedures. Pete Callahan straightened up from his surveying work, his 71-year-old frame showing the dignity of someone who had supervised major construction projects throughout his career. The retired power plant worker's expression reflected decades of experience dealing with contractors who valued politics over competence. "Frank, I've been building electrical systems since before you got out of trade school," Pete said evenly. "This foundation work meets or exceeds any standards your company uses." Jake appreciated Pete's defense, but recognized the need to maintain focus on construction activities rather than engage in public arguments with Frank Barone. The demonstration's success depended on technical performance, not winning verbal confrontations with skeptical competitors. "We've got work to finish," Jake said, turning his attention back to the concrete pour. "Foundation needs to be completed before the inspector arrives." Frank's companions took photographs of the construction site and made notes about equipment. Specifications visible in Jake's blueprints. Their documentation suggested preparation for formal challenges to the demonstration's validity or attempts to replicate successful techniques for regional electrical's future projects. "Take all the pictures you want," Eddie Kowalski said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone proud of his workmanship. "Every joint, every connection, every measurement is exactly right." The regional electrical representatives exchanged glances before returning to Frank's truck, their brief inspection apparently providing whatever information they had come to gather. Frank lingered for a moment, clearly hoping to provoke additional confrontation or gather intelligence about construction timelines. "Jake, you've got 2 weeks before the council votes on infrastructure proposals," Frank said. "Hope your system's ready for testing by then, because this is your only chance to prove it works." After Frank's departure, the construction crew resumed their work with renewed determination. Pete's team understood that they were participating in something larger than a technical demonstration, representing the principle that innovation and careful workmanship could compete with established business interests. Dr. Eleanor Hunt arrived, At the construction site, carrying a weather monitoring station and several electronic instruments for tracking atmospheric conditions. The retired meteorologist's scientific equipment would document environmental factors during the demonstration, providing objective data about testing conditions and system performance. "How's the construction progressing?" she asked Jake, setting up her weather station on a tripod positioned to monitor wind, precipitation, and temperature throughout the coming weeks. Jake wiped concrete residue from his hands and consulted his construction timeline, calculating remaining tasks against available time before potential testing opportunities. Dr. Hunt's weather data would be crucial for validating demonstration results and defending them against political challenges. "Foundation should be ready for the platform structure tomorrow," Jake said. "Electrical installation can begin by the weekend if everything stays on schedule." Dr. Hunt activated her monitoring equipment and recorded baseline measurements in a leather-bound notebook. Her systematic approach to data collection reflected the scientific rigor that would distinguish Jake's demonstration from typical contractor installations. Latest weather models show a significant low-pressure system developing over the Pacific Northwest, she reported. Could reach our region within 10 to 14 days, bringing substantial precipitation that might trigger flood conditions. The timing created both opportunity and pressure for Jake's demonstration project. Early flood testing would provide dramatic proof of his system's effectiveness, but only if construction could be completed and equipment installed before the storm system arrived. Tommy Hughes appeared at the construction site after school, his backpack slung over one shoulder and his football cleats hanging from his belt. The 16-year-old surveyed the progress with obvious pride, understanding that his father's project was attracting serious attention from throughout the community. "Dad, Coach Wilson wants to know if the football team can help with construction," Tommy said. "Most of the guys have job experience, and we're done with practice by 4 o'clock. Jake considered the offer of additional labor, recognizing both the practical benefits and the symbolic importance of younger community members supporting the demonstration project. High school students represented the future workforce that would inherit whatever infrastructure decisions were made today. "Tell Coach Wilson we could use help moving equipment and materials," Jake said. "But only if parents sign permission forms and everyone understands this is voluntary." Tommy's enthusiasm was evident as he pulled out his phone to text teammates about the construction opportunity. The teenager's pride in his father's project had grown throughout the past weeks as he witnessed the community support and professional validation Jake was receiving. Sarah Vargas returned from her truck carrying additional permit documentation and a surveyor's transit for verifying elevation measurements. The town engineer's continued involvement provided official oversight that would be crucial for defending the demonstration against regulatory challenges. "Building inspector confirmed his 2 o'clock appointment," she announced. "I'll handle the technical discussion about code compliance and construction standards." Jake appreciated Sarah's protection from bureaucratic complications that could derail the project on procedural grounds rather than technical merit. Her engineering credentials and municipal position provided credibility that his practical expertise alone might not achieve with skeptical officials. Pete's crew completed the concrete foundation pour as the lunch hour approached. Their mornings, work representing the critical first phase of construction. The elevated platform would provide the foundation for Jake's flood-proof electrical system, demonstrating principles that could revolutionize infrastructure design throughout flood-prone regions. "Foundation looks good," Pete announced, surveying the smooth concrete surface with professional satisfaction, ready for platform construction once the concrete reaches working strength. Eddie Kowalski cleaned his tools and prepared to return to his regular plumbing job, but his expression showed continued commitment to the demonstration project. The volunteer crew understood they were participating in something that could influence infrastructure decisions for years to come. "I can be back tomorrow evening for platform installation," Eddie offered. "Wife's got church meeting, so I've got time to work." Jake felt grateful for the continued support from skilled workers who were sacrificing personal time to help prove his concept. Their expertise and dedication represented the community investment that made the demonstration possible despite limited financial resources. Dr. Hunt completed her weather station setup and recorded initial atmospheric measurements, establishing baseline conditions for tracking environmental changes throughout the coming weeks. Her scientific documentation would provide objective validation of testing conditions when flood events occurred. "Storm systems intensifying faster than initial projections," she reported, consulting updated weather data on her tablet. "We might see precipitation beginning within 7 to 10 days rather than 2 weeks. The accelerated weather timeline increased urgency for completing construction and equipment installation before testing opportunities arrived. Jake's demonstration would have only one chance to prove its effectiveness under actual flood conditions, making preparation time critical for success. "We'll be ready," Jake said, his voice carrying the quiet determination that had sustained him throughout the challenging project. "This system's going to work exactly as designed." Tommy looked at his father with obvious admiration, understanding that Jake's confidence came from thorough preparation and careful engineering rather than wishful thinking. The teenager was beginning to appreciate the difference between his father's methodical approach and the political maneuvering he had observed from Frank Barone. "Dad, everyone at school's talking about this project," Tommy said. "Even kids whose parents work for Frank are rooting for you to prove it works." Jake realized that his demonstration had captured community imagination beyond the technical and political considerations that had initially motivated his challenge to Frank Barone. Young people understood the value of innovation and were less influenced by established business relationships than their parents might be. "Success will speak for itself," Jake replied. "Good engineering doesn't need political support to work properly." The afternoon building inspection proceeded smoothly, with Sarah's technical explanations satisfying official requirements for foundation construction and electrical installation permits. Her professional credibility eliminated potential bureaucratic obstacles that could have delayed the project at crucial moments. As the workday concluded, Jake's volunteer crew dispersed to their regular jobs and family responsibilities, but their commitment to returning for continued construction was evident. The demonstration project had become a community effort that transcended individual interests in favor of collective improvement. "See you tomorrow evening," Pete called as he loaded tools into his truck. "Platform installation's going to be the interesting part." Jake remained at the construction site after the others departed, reviewing blueprints and equipment specifications for the next phase of work. The flood-proof electrical system was taking physical form, but its ultimate test would come when natural forces challenged every design decision and construction detail. Dr. Hunt's weather monitoring equipment continued recording atmospheric data as evening approached, documenting conditions that would provide scientific context for whatever demonstration events occurred in the coming weeks. Her instruments represented the objective measurement that would validate or disprove Jake's engineering claims. The steel framework for Jake's elevated electrical platform rose against the gray October sky as his expanded volunteer crew worked through their third consecutive evening of construction. The Hilltop High School football team had arrived directly from practice, their jerseys still damp with sweat as they helped position heavy equipment and run electrical conduit under the guidance of Pete's experienced tradesman. Tommy Hughes directed, his teammates in carrying waterproof electrical panels from Jake's truck to the installation site, his leadership evident as he coordinated the teenager's efforts with the precision of someone who had inherited his father's organizational skills. The 16-year-old's pride in the project was obvious to everyone working on the site. Careful with that main disconnect, Tommy instructed his friend Marcus Rodriguez, Fire Chief Rodriguez's son. Dad says each panel costs more than my car. Marcus nodded seriously, understanding the importance of the equipment they were handling. The 17-year-old had grown up listening to his father discuss emergency response challenges during flood events, and he recognized the potential impact of Jake's flood-resistant system on public safety. Jake supervised the installation of the primary electrical equipment, his movements deliberate and methodical as he connected circuits according to specifications that had been refined through months of careful calculation. Each connection point was photographed by Dr. Hunt for documentation purposes, creating a permanent record of construction quality and technical standards. Main power feeds are connected, Jake announced to his crew. Ready to test the primary distribution circuits before installing the emergency backup systems. Pete Callahan operated the testing equipment while Eddie Kowalski recorded voltage and current measurements in a logbook that would provide technical validation of the system's performance. The older men's expertise ensured that each installation step met professional standards despite the volunteer nature of the construction effort. A convoy of 3 black SUVs pulled up along River Street, their tinted windows and municipal license plates suggesting official business rather than casual. Observation. Jake paused his electrical work as Mayor Robert Dean emerged from the lead vehicle, followed by several council members and the regional electrical systems representative who had visited the site previously. "Mr. Hughes," Mayor Dean called out, his voice carrying the formal tone reserved for official municipal business. "We need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your demonstration project." Jake climbed down from the elevated platform, noting the serious expressions on the faces of the municipal officials. Sarah Vargas appeared at his side, her presence as town engineer providing some protection against bureaucratic pressure that might threaten the project's completion. Council member Patricia Taylor stepped forward, carrying a manila folder thick with documentation. Her expression suggested reluctance to deliver unwelcome news, but her professional responsibility to the council required addressing whatever issues had prompted this unscheduled site visit. "We've received formal complaints about unpermitted electrical work and potential safety violations," she announced, opening her folder to reveal official-looking documents. "The city has liability concerns about experimental installations that might affect public safety." Jake felt his stomach drop as he realized Frank Barone had escalated his opposition beyond political maneuvering to direct regulatory interference. The timing of the complaints, arriving just as the demonstration system neared completion, suggested coordinated effort to prevent testing under actual flood conditions. "All work has been performed under proper permits," Sarah interjected, producing her own documentation. "I've personally inspected every phase of construction and verified compliance with electrical codes and municipal standards." The regional electrical representative stepped forward, his expensive suit and confident bearing suggesting someone accustomed to influencing municipal decisions through professional authority and political connections. His presence implied that the complaints involved more than local politics. "Ms. Vargas, experimental electrical systems require specialized oversight that exceeds normal municipal engineering capabilities," he said smoothly. Regional Electrical Systems has identified several potential code violations that could create liability exposure for the city. Pete Callahan looked up from his testing equipment, his weathered face showing the irritation of someone who had spent decades dealing with bureaucratic interference in practical problem-solving efforts. The retired power plant worker's expression reflected confidence in his work and disdain for political manipulation. "What specific violations?" Pete demanded. "Every connection, every circuit, every safety device meets or exceeds national electrical code requirements." Mayor Dean consulted the documents in Patricia Taylor's folder, his expression suggesting uncertainty about technical details, but concern about political ramifications of allowing the demonstration to proceed. The mayor's primary responsibility involved avoiding controversies that might reflect poorly on his administration. The complaints reference inadequate grounding systems, improper equipment ratings for outdoor installations, and insufficient surge protection for sensitive electronic components, the mayor read from the official documentation. Jake realized that someone with detailed electrical knowledge had prepared the complaints, identifying technical issues that would require extensive documentation to refute. The specificity of the charges suggested Frank Barone had enlisted professional assistance in crafting regulatory challenges. "I can provide engineering calculations and manufacturer specifications for every component," Jake said, his voice remaining steady despite his growing anger at the bureaucratic sabotage. "The system exceeds safety requirements in every category." Dr. Hunt approached the group, carrying her weather monitoring equipment and a tablet displaying current atmospheric data. The retired meteorologist's scientific authority provided independent validation of the project's importance that extended beyond local political considerations. "Gentlemen, latest weather models show the storm system accelerating toward our region," she announced. "We could see precipitation beginning within 48 hours, potentially triggering flood conditions by the weekend. The timing created urgent pressure for resolving the regulatory challenges before natural testing opportunities arrived." Jake's demonstration would prove nothing if bureaucratic interference prevented system operation during actual flood events. Council member Bill Hammond emerged from one of the SUVs, his expression showing satisfaction at the apparent success of efforts to halt Jake's project. The political ally of Frank Barone had consistently opposed innovative solutions in favor of conventional contractors and established business relationships. "Dr. Hunt, the city appreciates your weather analysis," Hammond said, "but we can't risk public safety on experimental systems that haven't undergone proper regulatory review." Tommy Hughes looked at his father with concern, sensing the adult's tension and understanding that months of work might be threatened by bureaucratic obstacles beyond technical control. The teenager's teammates gathered around him, their expressions showing confusion about the sudden official intervention. "Dad, what's happening?" Tommy asked quietly. Jake considered his response carefully, recognizing that his explanation would influence not only his son's understanding, but also the teenager's perception of how political systems responded to innovation and community improvement efforts. "Some people think bureaucratic rules are more important than solving problems," Jake said, his voice carrying disappointment but not defeat. Sarah Vargas stepped between Jake and the municipal officials, her role as town engineer providing both technical authority and political protection for the demonstration project. Her professional reputation was now linked to the system's success or failure. "I'll stake my engineering license on this installation's safety and code compliance," she declared firmly. "Every component has been properly specified, installed and tested according to industry standards." Mayor Dean looked uncomfortable with the escalating confrontation between his engineering staff and the political pressures represented by Frank Barone's allies. The mayor's decision would determine whether innovation could proceed or whether established business interests would prevail through regulatory manipulation. "Ms. Vargas, your confidence is noted," the mayor said carefully. But the city attorney has advised caution about liability exposure from experimental installations. The regional electrical representative produced his own folder of documentation, suggesting that the regulatory challenges had been prepared with professional thoroughness, designed to overwhelm Jake's volunteer effort with bureaucratic complexity. We've prepared a comprehensive analysis of code compliance issues that require resolution before any experimental system can be considered safe for operation, he announced, offering the folder to Mayor Dean. Pete Callahan climbed down from the electrical platform, his testing equipment showing successful completion of all safety checks and performance verification. The retired power plant worker's expression reflected decades of experience with regulatory games that prioritized politics over engineering competence. "You want to talk about safety?" Pete said, his voice carrying across the construction site. "This system will keep the hospital running when conventional installations fail. How's that for public safety?" Dr. Amanda Bell's arrival in her small sedan provided unexpected support for Jake's position. The emergency room physician had apparently learned about the regulatory challenge and come to offer her perspective on the medical implications of reliable emergency power systems. "Mayor Dean, I need to speak about the hospital's power requirements during flood emergencies," she said, approaching the group with the confident bearing of someone whose professional opinion carried weight in community discussions. The doctor's presence shifted the conversation from abstract regulatory concerns to concrete life safety issues that elected officials couldn't easily dismiss. Her medical authority represented community interests that transcended political relationships with contractors. "Dr. Bell, we appreciate your input," Mayor Dean said, "but regulatory compliance must precede any operational considerations." Jake felt the frustration of watching bureaucratic processes threaten a project that could genuinely improve community safety and resilience. The irony of regulatory rules blocking innovation designed to exceed safety standards wasn't lost on anyone. "Present, how long does the city need to review compliance documentation?" Jake asked, calculating whether regulatory delays would prevent testing during the approaching storm system. Patricia Taylor consulted her folder again, clearly uncomfortable with the political pressure to delay a project that her technical review had found satisfactory. The council member's expression suggested conflict between professional judgment and political loyalty. "Standard review procedures require 2 to 3 weeks for comprehensive analysis," she said reluctantly. Dr. Hunt checked her weather monitoring equipment, confirming that the accelerated storm timeline would make regulatory delays equivalent to project cancellation. The meteorologist's scientific data provided objective evidence of the impossible choice being forced on Jake's demonstration. "The storm system will arrive long before any review can be completed," Dr. Hunt observed. "This appears to be an attempt to prevent testing rather than ensure safety." Jake looked around at his volunteer crew, seeing faces that reflected disappointment and anger at the bureaucratic sabotage of their community improvement effort. The high school students appeared particularly affected by witnessing how political manipulation could override technical merit and public benefit. "We'll complete the installation tonight," Jake announced, his voice carrying determination rather than defeat. "When the flood comes, this system will be ready to prove itself regardless of regulatory games." Mayor Dean's expression showed alarm at Jake's apparent intention to proceed despite official concerns. The mayor's political instincts recognized the potential for public confrontation that could reflect poorly on municipal leadership. "Mr. Hughes, the city cannot authorize operation of systems under regulatory review," the mayor warned. Jake realized that his response would determine not only the fate of his demonstration project, but also the community's understanding of how innovation and public benefit could be sacrificed to political expedience and bureaucratic obstruction. "Your authorization isn't required for proving that good engineering works better than expensive politics," Jake replied. "When people's lives depend on reliable power, technical performance matters more than regulatory approval." The municipal officials returned to their vehicles with obvious frustration at their inability to halt Jake's project through bureaucratic pressure. Their departure left the construction crew to continue work with renewed determination to complete the installation before weather events provided testing opportunities. "Back to work," Pete called out, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had faced down bureaucratic intimidation throughout his career. "This system's going to work exactly as designed, regardless of what politicians think about it." The rain began at 3:15 Friday morning, a steady drumming against Jake's bedroom window that pulled him from restless sleep. He lay in the darkness, listening to the intensity increase, his engineer's mind automatically calculating precipitation rates and drainage capacity throughout Hilltop's vulnerable neighborhoods. Dr. Hunt's weather predictions were proving accurate. With troubling precision, Jake dressed quickly and drove through empty streets toward the River Street demonstration site, his truck's headlights cutting through sheets of rain that reduced visibility to less than 50 yards. The storm had arrived 12 hours ahead of the most optimistic projections, catching the community with minimal preparation time for what could become a significant flood event. At the substation site, Jake's flood-proof electrical system stood, ready for its ultimate test. The elevated platform kept critical equipment 8 feet above the surrounding ground level, while waterproof housings protected sensitive components from direct precipitation. Emergency battery banks maintained full charge status, their LED indicators glowing steadily through the pre-dawn darkness. Jake activated his system's monitoring equipment, recording baseline measurements of voltage, current, and environmental conditions that would document performance throughout the coming flood event. His careful preparation was about to face validation or failure under conditions that couldn't be simulated or postponed. His phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Hunt. "River levels rising faster than expected. Possible flash flooding within 6-8 hours. System status?" Jake typed his response while rain pounded against his truck's windshield. "All systems operational. Ready for testing." The drive to Hughes Electric revealed increasing precipitation accumulation on normally dry streets. Storm drains, designed for typical autumn rainfall, were already showing signs of capacity stress, with standing water beginning to form at low-lying intersections throughout the Basin District. Inside his shop, Jake monitored weather reports while organizing emergency equipment and communication devices. The National Weather Service had issued flash flood warnings for the entire region, predicting precipitation totals that could exceed historical records for October storm events. Tommy appeared in the shop doorway at 6:30, his school clothes damp from the short run between the house and the building. The 16-year-old's expression showed excitement mixed with concern as he watched his father prepare for the approaching crisis. "Dad, school's cancelled because of flooding warnings," Tommy announced. "Can I help monitor the demonstration?" "System." Jake considered his son's request, recognizing both the educational value and the personal risk of involving Tommy in what could become a dangerous situation. The teenager's engineering aptitude and familiarity with the system made him a valuable assistant, but flood emergencies created unpredictable hazards. "You can help with data collection and communication," Jake agreed, "but only from safe locations. If conditions get dangerous, you go home immediately." Tommy nodded eagerly, understanding the seriousness of his father's conditions, while appreciating the opportunity to participate in proving the system's effectiveness. The teenager had invested considerable emotional energy in the project's success. By 8 o'clock, water was standing 6 inches deep on River Street near the demonstration site. Jake and Tommy arrived to find Dr. Hunt already positioned with her weather monitoring equipment, documenting atmospheric conditions and precipitation, measurements that would provide scientific context for the electrical system's performance. Rainfall rate peaked at 2.4 inches per hour around 7 o'clock, Dr. Hunt reported, consulting her instruments. River levels have risen 3 feet since midnight and are continuing to climb steadily. Jake checked his system's status, indicators, confirming that all circuits remained operational despite rising water levels that had reached the base of the elevated platform. The waterproof equipment housings showed no signs of moisture intrusion, and voltage readings remained stable across all distribution circuits. Deputy Sheriff Mike Mendoza arrived in his patrol vehicle, its emergency lights reflecting off standing water that now covered the road surface throughout the Basin District. The emergency coordinator's presence indicated official recognition of developing crisis conditions that would test municipal infrastructure beyond normal capacity. "Jake, how's your system handling the conditions?" Mike asked, climbing out of his patrol car with obvious concern about the rapidly deteriorating situation. Jake pointed to his monitoring equipment, which continued displaying normal operating parameters, despite flood conditions that would have disabled conventional electrical installations hours ago. The demonstration was exceeding his most optimistic performance expectations. All circuits operational, Jake reported. Emergency power systems are ready if main grid connections fail. Mike's radio crackled with reports from throughout Hilltop. As the flood emergency developed beyond routine municipal capabilities, emergency services were documenting power outages, transportation disruptions, and evacuation requests that stretched response resources to their limits. "Use electric to emergency command," Mike spoke into his radio. "River Street demonstration site shows electrical systems operational despite significant flooding. Request status update on municipal power grid." The radio response confirmed Jake's predictions about conventional infrastructure vulnerability. Emergency command to all units. Widespread power failures reported throughout Basin District. Hospital backup generators activated. Main substation experiencing equipment failures. Tommy looked at his father with obvious pride, understanding that the demonstration system was performing exactly as designed while established infrastructure failed under conditions that Jake had anticipated and prepared for. The teenager's confidence in his father's engineering capabilities was being validated in real time. Dr. Hunt continued documenting weather conditions while photographing Jake's operational electrical equipment surrounded by floodwater that had reached nearly 4 feet in depth. Her scientific records would provide objective evidence of the system's performance under extreme conditions. "This is unprecedented precipitation for October," she observed, updating her logbook with current measurements. "The system's performing better than conventional installations would under normal autumn conditions." A splash of approaching footsteps announced Sarah Vargas's arrival, the town engineer wading through knee-deep water to reach the demonstration site. Her expression showed a mixture of professional amazement and personal vindication as she observed Jake's system operating normally, despite flood conditions. "Municipal electrical systems are failing throughout the downtown area," Sarah reported. "Your installation is the only operational grid connection in the entire Basin District." Jake felt satisfaction at his system's validated performance, but his engineering focus remained on monitoring equipment status and documenting technical data that would prove the design's effectiveness to skeptical officials. The demonstration's success would mean nothing without comprehensive documentation. Mike's radio brought urgent communications from the hospital. "Emergency command, this is Hilltop Regional. Main power lost, backup generators experiencing fuel. System problems. Requesting emergency electrical support for critical systems." The crisis had escalated beyond demonstration purposes to actual life safety implications. Jake's flood-proof system represented the only available electrical resource capable of supporting emergency medical operations during the ongoing flood event. "Mike, my system can provide emergency power to the hospital," Jake announced. "I've got portable generators and transfer equipment in my truck." The deputy sheriff's expression showed relief at having practical solution options during a crisis that was overwhelming conventional emergency response capabilities. His radio communications confirmed that normal backup systems were proving inadequate for extended emergency operations. Hospital Command Emergency Services has identified emergency electrical support, Mike transmitted. Portable power systems available for critical medical equipment. Jake began organizing portable electrical equipment while Tommy assisted with loading generators and transfer panels into waterproof transportation containers. The demonstration had evolved from proving technical concepts to providing actual emergency services during a community crisis. Frank Barone's arrival in his company truck created a dramatic contrast to Jake's successful emergency response. The established electrical contractor emerged from his vehicle to find Jake's system operating normally, while conventional installations throughout the area had failed completely. "This is temporary luck, not engineering success," Frank declared, his voice carrying defensive tone that suggested recognition of his system's inferior performance. "Real infrastructure requires professional installation and maintenance." Pete Callahan appeared from behind Jake's equipment platform, his waterproof gear indicating he had been monitoring system performance throughout the early morning hours. The retired power plant worker's expression showed satisfaction at witnessing vindication of their volunteer construction effort. "Frank, Jake's amateur system is the only electrical service working in the entire district," Pete said firmly. "Maybe it's time to admit that good engineering beats expensive politics." Frank's response was interrupted by urgent radio communications from emergency services, requesting immediate electrical support for evacuation operations and medical facilities. The community crisis had made political arguments irrelevant compared to practical problem-solving capabilities. Dr. Amanda Bell arrived in the hospital's emergency vehicle, her medical authority adding urgency to requests for electrical support during the ongoing crisis. The physician's presence emphasized the life safety implications of reliable emergency power systems. "We need electrical power for dialysis machines and respiratory equipment," she announced. "Backup generators are failing, and we have patients whose lives depend on continuous electrical support." Jake's demonstration had transformed from technical validation to emergency response, with his flood-proof system providing the only reliable electrical service available during the community's greatest infrastructure crisis in decades. The success exceeded all expectations while proving every prediction about conventional system failures. "Tommy, help me load the portable transfer equipment," Jake instructed. "We're going to power the hospital until normal service can be restored." As they prepared emergency electrical support, Jake realized that his challenge to Frank Barone had evolved far beyond personal competition or business disputes. The flood-proof electrical system was saving lives while proving that innovation and careful engineering could protect communities during natural disasters. The storm continued with unrelenting intensity, but Jake's system maintained stable operation. Throughout the crisis, emergency services began coordinating around his electrical capabilities, recognizing that the demonstration project had become the community's primary electrical resource during their time of greatest need. Status report confirms Hughes' electrical system operational. Mike transmitted to emergency command. All other Basin District power sources offline. Hospital emergency electrical support in progress. Jake felt the weight of community responsibility as emergency personnel relied on his engineering decisions and construction quality during actual life-threatening conditions. The demonstration had proven itself under circumstances that exceeded the most demanding test scenarios he had imagined. Dr. Hunt's scientific documentation captured both the meteorological conditions and the electrical system's performance, creating permanent records of unprecedented storm impacts and innovative infrastructure responses. Her data would support future policy decisions about flood-resistant electrical design. This represents a paradigm shift in emergency infrastructure planning, she observed, updating her comprehensive logbook. The system's performance validates entirely new approaches to community resilience. As emergency operations continued around Jake's functioning electrical system, Frank Barone departed without further comment. The conventional contractor's political arguments had been rendered irrelevant by demonstrated technical superiority under actual crisis conditions. The flood continued rising, but Jake's elevated electrical platform maintained normal operations while conventional systems throughout Hilltop failed completely. Emergency services coordinated rescue operations and medical support around the only reliable electrical infrastructure remaining functional during the community's greatest natural disaster in recent memory. The emergency generators Jake had connected to Hilltop Regional Hospital hummed steadily outside the medical facility. As dawn broke over the flooded community, inside the building, critical care equipment operated normally despite the municipal power grid's complete failure throughout the Basin District. Dr. Amanda Bell monitored 3 patients on life support whose survival depended entirely on Jake's emergency electrical systems. "Dialysis patient in room 12 is stable," she reported to Tommy Hughes, who was maintaining communication logs between the hospital and emergency command. The 16-year-old had proven invaluable as a coordination link, tracking power requirements and system status throughout the night-long crisis. Jake worked methodically through the hospital corridors, inspecting electrical connections and monitoring equipment performance with the careful attention of someone who understood that lives depended on every circuit and cable operating flawlessly. His portable electrical distribution panels had transformed the medical facility into an island of functioning technology surrounded by a community plunged into darkness. Respiratory therapy reports all ventilators operating normally, Nurse Catherine Brooks announced from the critical care station. The veteran medical professional's calm demeanor reflected confidence in the electrical systems that had sustained emergency operations throughout the most challenging night in the hospital's history. Outside the hospital, floodwater continued, rising despite the storm's intensity beginning to diminish. The Knife River had crested 6 feet above flood stage, inundating the entire Basin District and stranding hundreds of residents who required evacuation to higher ground. Emergency rescue operations proceeded under portable lighting powered by Jake's generator systems. Deputy Sheriff Mike Mendoza coordinated rescue activities from the hospital parking lot, using Jake's electrical infrastructure to power communications, equipment and emergency lighting systems that guided evacuation boats through flooded neighborhoods. The deputy's radio crackled with status reports from throughout the affected area. "Rescue Team 3 to Emergency Command," came a voice through the static. "Completed evacuation of Riverside Drive, moving to assist with Sacred Heart Church shelter operations." Father Michael Mahoney had opened St. Mark Church as an emergency shelter, but the building's electrical systems had failed when floodwater reached the basement electrical panels. Jake's portable generators were providing power for heating, lighting and communication systems that made the shelter habitable for displaced families. "Jake, we've got 47 people at the church shelter," Mike reported. "Your generators are keeping them warm and safe." Jake felt the profound responsibility of community reliance on his engineering decisions and construction quality. What had begun as a technical demonstration to prove Frank Barone wrong had evolved into the primary electrical infrastructure supporting Hilltop's emergency response during the worst natural disaster in living memory. Maria Ramos appeared at the hospital entrance, her clothes damp from wading through floodwater, but her expression showing determination rather than distress. The diner owner carried several containers of hot coffee and sandwiches prepared on gas-powered equipment for emergency workers who'd been operating without rest throughout the crisis. "Brought food for everyone working the emergency," she announced, setting up a serving area near Jake's electrical distribution panels. "Coffee's strong and the sandwiches are fresh." Tommy gratefully accepted coffee and a sandwich, realizing he hadn't eaten since the previous evening when the storm began intensifying. The teenager's role in coordinating communications had kept him too busy to consider basic needs, but Maria's arrival reminded him of the community effort supporting the emergency response. "Mrs. Ramos, how's the downtown area?" Tommy asked between bites of sandwich. Maria's expression sobered as she described conditions throughout Hilltop's business district. The flood had reached depths not seen since the 1960s, overwhelming drainage systems and inundating buildings with several feet of standing water that had disabled most electrical and heating systems. "Main Street's underwater up to the store. Windows," she reported. "Bell Hardware, the pharmacy, even the bank have flood damage. Only places with power are running on Jake's generators." Dr. Hunt arrived carrying waterproof containers filled with scientific instruments and documentation from her continued weather monitoring throughout the flood event. The retired meteorologist's systematic data collection was creating a comprehensive record of both the storm's unprecedented intensity and Jake's electrical system's performance under extreme conditions. Peak flood levels exceeded any recorded event since measurement began in 1943, she announced, consulting her latest readings. Jake's system has operated continuously for 18 hours under conditions that would have destroyed conventional installations within the first 2 hours. The scientific validation of his system's performance provided objective evidence that would be crucial for defending the demonstration's results against future political challenges. Jake appreciated Dr. Hunt's thorough documentation, understanding that technical success meant nothing without credible measurement and analysis. "Dr. Hunt, what's the timeline for water levels to recede?" Jake asked, planning for the transition from emergency response to recovery operations. The meteorologist consulted her weather data and river gauge measurements, calculating drainage rates and precipitation patterns that would determine how long flood conditions would persist throughout the affected areas. "River levels should begin dropping by late afternoon," she predicted, but standing water in low-lying areas could persist for several days, depending on drainage system functionality. Jake's electrical systems would need to continue operating throughout the extended recovery period, supporting not only emergency medical care, but also the pumping and drainage operations required to restore normal community functions. His demonstration had become the foundation for Hilltop's entire disaster response capability. A commotion at the hospital entrance announced the arrival of Mayor Robert Dean and several council members, their expensive vehicles somehow having navigated the flooded streets to reach the medical facility. The mayor's presence suggested official recognition that the municipal crisis required acknowledging Jake's electrical systems as essential infrastructure. "Mr. Hughes," Mayor Dean called out, his formal tone suggesting difficulty accepting the reality of depending on someone he had recently dismissed as an amateur. "The city appreciates your emergency assistance during this unprecedented situation." Jake continued monitoring his electrical equipment while responding to the mayor's awkward expression of gratitude. The political leader's discomfort was obvious, but community safety considerations had forced recognition of technical competence over bureaucratic preferences. Mayor Dean, my systems will continue operating as long as they're needed for emergency. Response, Jake replied diplomatically. Councilmember Patricia Taylor stepped forward, her expression showing professional admiration for the electrical infrastructure that had sustained the community through its greatest crisis. The council member's engineering background allowed her to appreciate both the technical achievement and the lives that had been saved. Jake, your system's performance has exceeded everyone's expectations, she admitted. The council needs to discuss long-term infrastructure planning based on what we've learned during this emergency. Pete Callahan emerged from the hospital building where he had been assisting with electrical system maintenance throughout the night. The retired power plant worker's satisfaction was evident as he surveyed the functioning emergency operations. Powered entirely by equipment that he and his volunteer crew had installed just days earlier, Council finally figured out the difference between real engineering and expensive talk, Pete observed with characteristic directness. Mayor Dean looked uncomfortable with Pete's blunt assessment, but the objective evidence of system performance made arguments impossible. Jake's flood-proof electrical design had proven itself under conditions that had completely overwhelmed the conventional infrastructure that the council had previously favored. The regional electrical systems proposal will need reconsideration, Mayor Dean conceded reluctantly. Current circumstances require evaluation of all available options for infrastructure improvement. Jake realized that his demonstration had achieved far more than proving Frank Barone wrong or winning a municipal contract. The flood emergency had demonstrated the life-saving potential of innovative engineering approaches that prioritized community, resilience over political convenience, and established business relationships. Sarah Vargas arrived with a tablet computer containing damage assessment data from throughout the affected area. The town engineer's expression showed amazement at the scope of infrastructure failure compared to the continued operation of Jake's. Experimental systems, preliminary damage reports show complete electrical failure in 63% of municipal infrastructure, she announced. Jake's installation is the only electrical system operating normally throughout the entire emergency zone. The comprehensive failure of conventional systems provided stark contrast to Jake's successful flood-resistant design, creating undeniable evidence that innovative approaches could deliver superior performance compared to expensive traditional installations that had proven inadequate during actual emergency conditions. Dr. Amanda Bell joined the group gathered around Jake's electrical equipment, her medical authority adding weight to assessments of the system's community impact during the crisis. The physician's perspective emphasized the life safety implications that transcended political and business considerations. Without Jake's emergency electrical support, we would have lost at least 3 patients whose survival depended on continuous medical equipment operation, she stated firmly. His engineering literally saved lives during this disaster. The doctor's testimony provided moral authority that made political arguments about regulatory approval and established contractors seem petty compared to actual human consequences. Jake's demonstration had proven that technical competence and community service mattered more than bureaucratic compliance and business relationships. Tommy looked at his father with obvious pride, understanding that the flood emergency had validated not only Jake's engineering capabilities, but also his commitment to community welfare over personal gain. The teenager had witnessed firsthand how innovation and determination could triumph over skepticism and political opposition. "Dad, everyone knows your system works better than anything Frank Barone could have built," Tommy observed. Jake felt gratitude for his son's support and the community's recognition of his contribution during the crisis. But his engineer's focus remained on ensuring continued reliable operation throughout the recovery period. Technical success required sustained performance, not just dramatic proof during emergency conditions. The system's designed for long-term reliability, Jake replied. Emergency response is just the beginning of what flood-resistant infrastructure can accomplish for community resilience. As afternoon sunlight broke through the dissipating storm clouds, Jake's electrical systems continued operating normally, while conventional infrastructure throughout Hilltop remained disabled by flood damage. Emergency operations proceeded smoothly around his functioning electrical grid, demonstrating the transformative potential of innovative engineering approaches. Mayor Dean prepared to depart, but paused to address Jake directly rather than communicating through intermediaries or formal statements. The mayor's personal acknowledgement represented political recognition that couldn't be easily withdrawn or minimized during future discussions. Mr. Hughes, the city will be requesting formal proposals for comprehensive electrical infrastructure upgrades based on your flood-resistant design principles, the mayor announced. Your demonstration has proven that innovative approaches deserve serious consideration for municipal applications. Jake's challenge to Frank Barone had achieved complete vindication, but more importantly, it had established new standards for community infrastructure that would protect residents during future natural disasters. The flood emergency had transformed a personal dispute into a paradigm shift toward resilient engineering solutions. 3 weeks after the floodwaters receded, Jake stood before a packed city council chamber that buzzed with an energy completely different from his initial presentation. Months earlier, every seat was filled with residents who had experienced firsthand the life-saving performance of his flood-resistant electrical system during Hilltop's worst natural disaster in decades. The atmosphere reflected community gratitude rather than skeptical dismissal. Mayor Robert Dean opened the special session with an acknowledgement that would have been unthinkable before the emergency demonstrated the superiority of innovative engineering over established political relationships. The mayor's prepared statement reflected careful consideration of how the crisis had changed municipal priorities and community expectations. This council session addresses infrastructure modernization based on documented performance during the October flood emergency, Mayor Dean announced. We're here to discuss comprehensive electrical upgrades that will protect our community during future natural disasters. Frank Barone sat in the front row, his expression showing resigned acceptance, rather than the confident opposition he had displayed during earlier meetings. The established electrical contractor's conventional systems had failed completely during the flood, while Jake's experimental installation had sustained the entire emergency response effort. Political arguments couldn't overcome such decisive technical vindication. Sarah Vargas presented detailed damage assessment reports that quantified the comprehensive failure of traditional electrical infrastructure compared to Jake's successful flood-resistant design. The town engineer's analysis provided objective documentation that supported revolutionary changes in municipal planning and contractor selection processes. Conventional electrical systems experienced 97% failure rates during peak flood conditions, Sarah reported. Jake's installation maintained 100% operational capability throughout the entire emergency period, while supporting critical medical equipment, emergency communications, and evacuation operations. Pete Callahan stood up from his seat in the audience, his weathered face showing satisfaction at witnessing the vindication of principled engineering over political expedience. The retired power plant workers' involvement in the demonstration project had proven that volunteer community effort could achieve superior results compared to expensive professional installations. This council spent months listening to fancy presentations from outside contractors, Pete said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. But when lives were on the line, it was local knowledge and careful engineering that kept the lights on. Dr. Eleanor Hunt presented her comprehensive meteorological analysis of the flood event, documenting both the unprecedented severity of the storm and the exceptional performance of Jake's electrical systems under extreme conditions. Her scientific credibility provided unassailable evidence for policy decisions that prioritized community resilience over conventional approaches. The October storm exceeded historical precipitation records by 43%, Dr. Hunt reported. Jake's flood-resistant electrical design not only survived these extreme conditions, but operated continuously to support emergency response operations that saved multiple lives. Tommy Hughes watched from the audience with obvious pride as community leaders acknowledged his father's engineering achievement and community service. The 16-year-old had participated directly in the emergency response, understanding that technical competence and innovative thinking had triumphed over skepticism and political manipulation. Council member Patricia Taylor addressed the political implications of the demonstration's success, acknowledging that the crisis had exposed weaknesses in municipal decision-making processes that favored established relationships over technical merit and community benefit. The emergency proved that our infrastructure planning must prioritize performance and reliability over contractor familiarity and political considerations, she stated. Jake's system delivered exactly what he promised, while conventional approaches failed when our community needed them most. Dr. Amanda Bell spoke about the medical implications of reliable emergency electrical infrastructure, describing how Jake's systems had enabled continuous operation of life support equipment that would have failed under conventional backup power. Limitations. Her testimony emphasized the human consequences of engineering decisions. 3 patients in our critical care unit owe their lives to the reliable electrical power that Jake's systems provided during the emergency, she testified. His flood-resistant design represents a fundamental advancement in community healthcare. Preparedness. Maria Ramos stood up from her seat near the back of the chamber, representing the small business community that had experienced both the flood's devastating impact and the protective capability of innovative infrastructure design. Her practical perspective reflected the economic implications of engineering decisions. My diner was one of the few businesses that stayed operational during the emergency because Jake's generators kept us running, she said. We fed emergency workers and provided communication coordination that helped save lives. Good engineering protected both people and livelihoods. Jake felt humbled by the community support and recognition of his contribution during the crisis, but his focus remained on ensuring that the lessons learned would improve long-term infrastructure resilience rather than simply providing personal vindication. Technical success meant nothing without sustained implementation of protective systems. The demonstration proved that flood-resistant electrical design can protect communities during natural disasters, Jake addressed the council. But real community benefit requires comprehensive implementation, not just emergency response capabilities. Mayor Dean consulted with other council members before announcing the decision that would transform Hilltop's infrastructure planning and establish new standards for municipal electrical systems throughout the region. The mayor's statement reflected political recognition of demonstrated technical superiority. The City Council unanimously approves comprehensive electrical infrastructure upgrades based on Jake Hughes's flood-resistant design principles, Mayor Dean declared. Mr. Hughes will serve as Chief Engineering Consultant for Municipal Electrical System Modernization. The announcement drew sustained applause from the packed chamber, reflecting community appreciation for both Jake's technical achievement and his commitment to public service over personal profit. The recognition represented validation of innovative engineering approaches that prioritized community protection over established business relationships. Frank Barone approached Jake after the formal session concluded, his expression showing professional respect rather than the dismissive arrogance he had displayed during earlier confrontations. The established contractor's acknowledgement represented personal recognition of technical superiority that transcended business competition. Jake, your system performed better than anything I could have designed, Frank admitted. I'd like to discuss partnering with you on the municipal upgrade project. Your engineering expertise, combined with my construction resources, could benefit the entire community. Jake considered Frank's offer carefully, recognizing both the practical advantages of collaboration and the symbolic importance of former opponents working together for community benefit. Technical achievement could bridge political divisions when focused on shared goals rather than personal competition. Frank, good engineering requires good construction, Jake replied. If you're committed to building systems that protect people rather than generating maximum profit, we can work together. Angela Hughes approached her brother-in-law with tears in her eyes, her emotion reflecting family pride in Jake's achievement and recognition of how his success honored the memory of his deceased wife. The personal validation was as meaningful as the professional acknowledgement from municipal officials. Lisa would be so proud of what you've accomplished, Angela said. You've built something that will protect families for generations to come. Jake felt the emotional weight of his sister-in-law's words, understanding that his engineering achievement represented more than technical success or professional vindication. The flood-resistant electrical system embodied his commitment to community service and family values that had guided his life since settling in Hilltop. Tommy joined his father and aunt, his teenage awkwardness overcome by genuine pride in witnessing his father's transformation from dismissed local electrician to recognized community leader and infrastructure innovator. The experience had shaped the young man's understanding of how determination and technical competence could create meaningful change. Dad, kids at school are calling you the guy who saved the town, Tommy reported with obvious admiration. Jake realized that his challenge to Frank Barone had evolved far beyond personal dispute or business competition into a community transformation that would influence infrastructure decisions and emergency preparedness for decades to come. The demonstration had proven that innovation and principled engineering could protect lives and property during natural disasters. Dr. Hunt approached with final documentation from her comprehensive weather and infrastructure analysis, her scientific records providing permanent evidence of both the storm's severity and the exceptional performance of Jake's electrical systems. Her work would influence policy decisions throughout the region. Jake, I'm submitting our data to the National Weather Service and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, she announced. Your flood-resistant design principles could become national standards for emergency infrastructure in flood-prone communities. The potential for broader impact beyond Hilltop represented the ultimate validation of Jake's engineering approach and community service. Local innovation could influence national policy, protecting countless families and communities facing similar natural disaster threats throughout the country. Deputy Sheriff Mike Mendoza joined the group gathered around Jake, his perspective as emergency coordinator, providing authoritative assessment of the system's impact on public safety and disaster response capabilities. His endorsement carried weight with federal agencies evaluating infrastructure improvements. FEMA representatives want to visit Hilltop to study Jake's flood-resistant electrical design, Mike reported. They're considering it as a model for emergency infrastructure grants throughout the upper Midwest. As the council chamber emptied and community members returned to their daily routines, Jake remained with his core supporters who had made the demonstration project possible through their expertise, labor, and unwavering belief in innovative solutions to community problems. Their collective effort had achieved something far greater than individual success. "We didn't just prove a point," Pete observed, surveying the group that had transformed from skeptical volunteers into vindicated community leaders. "We changed how this town thinks about protecting itself during emergencies." Jake looked around at the faces of people who had risked their reputations and invested their time in supporting his challenge to established systems and conventional thinking. Their faith in principled engineering and community service had been validated through technical performance and human benefit that would protect Hilltop for generations. "This is just the beginning," Jake said, his voice carrying quiet confidence about future possibilities. "Good engineering combined with community commitment can solve problems that seemed impossible when we started." The October flood had tested more than electrical systems and construction quality. It had tested the community's willingness to embrace innovation over tradition, technical merit over political connections, and collective benefit over individual profit. Hilltop had passed that test, establishing new standards for resilience and preparedness that would serve as a model for communities throughout the region. As Jake drove home through streets that showed few remaining signs of the devastating flood, he reflected on how the challenge to Frank Barone had transformed both his own life and his community's future. The flood-resistant electrical system, humming quietly throughout the town, represented more than technical achievement. It embodied the principle that careful engineering and community service could protect what mattered most when natural forces tested human preparation and resolve. Tommy sat beside his father in comfortable silence, understanding that they had witnessed something remarkable: the triumph of innovation over skepticism, community effort over individual ambition, and principled engineering over political expedience. The teenager had learned lessons about determination, technical competence, and public service that would influence his own future choices and contributions to community welfare. The small-town electrician, who had been dismissed as an amateur, had proven that hidden expertise and community commitment could revolutionize infrastructure planning and emergency preparedness. Jake Hughes had not only saved his town during its greatest crisis, he had shown that ordinary people with extraordinary determination could create lasting change that protected lives and property for generations to come. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.